Before we begin, thank you very much to Sith Phobos for joining the Patreon campaign. Thank you very much for the support. I say it, I know it loses meaning when I say it so often, but it genuinely is true. I can't do this without your support. So anyone who pitches into that Patreon, even if it's just $1 a month, you're helping me continue doing this for everybody, and it means the world to me. Thank you very much for the help. Now, today we have to talk the most thrilling topic in all of Transformers. Marketing. Hold on. Bear with me. Because I think this is worth pointing out, because I think it's a major problem that is only getting worse with recent developments in the Transformers community and business model. So, you see the Unicron trilogy, you see Armada here. It's very rare when I give Armada any kind of credit whatsoever, but hang on. Stick with this video long enough, and that is exactly what you will get out of me. So, what we're really talking here today is the expanse, the gulf between what is designed for kids and what is designed for collectors. Because we've had this for a long time now, but it's never been to the extremes that it is now. The strategy Hasbro has these days is that you have one line that is purely for little kids and appeals to them by being very inexpensive, very simple to transform, and very loaded down with gimmicks. And then you have the collector's line, which is nearly devoid of gimmicks, focused on being high quality action figures that can also transform. And by the way, they look just like the ones you grew up with if they actually had, skill back then. If they had advanced engineering back then, I should say. Let's not put them down. Skill's a bad word for that one. Point being, there is this enormous range between what they expect for kids and what they expect for adults, and where is the in-between, right? Because what they're hoping is that there's enough crossover appeal to support each other. When they do Grimlock and Optimus and all that in the little kids line, it's not just to use legacy characters. It's in hopes that the Grimlock collector buys this big gimmicky version. It's that the people who grew up with RID 2001, hey, here's a weird Skybite. And admittedly, yeah, I bought it because it was a weird Skybite. So it works a little bit. But when it comes to the big kids toys, the hope is that they produce characters that look cool enough just on a toy shelf that a kid is going to look at that and go, I want it. Because there's no way they know who Sure Shot is, or Crosshairs, or the Red One, who I always have to look up the name of because I didn't grow up with these toys, I didn't grow up with these characters, and they barely have any impact on the fiction. So, yeah, no kid is going to be interested in them in a character-wise. They have to be just cool-looking characters, which I would argue sometimes is not really possible when you have so many similar aerial bots at the same time, and weird characters like admittedly, my Cronus in box looks super weird, and not all that thrilling of a figure. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in that strategy. On the opposite end of that, I have, in this shop, I do have kids who come in and trade off old Transformers every now and then, but it's few and far between who actually had that. It's usually, it's usually like young adults, 30 somethings who come in and sell off the Transformers that they have accumulated. The point being, that's the strategy that Hasbro's gone with for a long time, and it's never been a wider gap than it is now. But this starts roughly 2007. So if we look back at the origin of this strategy, it goes all the way back to 2007. And they realized when they were doing the movie toy line, they're going to be producing very complex, very involved-looking Transformers that admittedly aren't going to appeal to kids the way they normally do. There's not a lot of bright, flashy colors to the toys. The detailing is going to be a lot more intricate and complex. Not big, simple things that kids can understand easier. So they recognize there's going to be a gap. So what do we get? We get the fast action battlers. So they dabbled in this with Heroes of Cybertron, in appropriately enough Cybertron, where there are smaller, affordable versions of these characters for little kids to afford. However, this is where we really got the origin of what we get today when it comes to the kids' gimmicky lines. They are smaller, they are very simple to transform, and they always come with some kind of action feature or gimmick. It's launching missiles, it's blades that fly out of their forearms. It's those little things. But the most important part of it is it's easy for a kid to handle, play with, and very hard for them to break, most importantly. But this strategy apparently worked well because Hasbro has been doing it ever since in various forms. Like in the other movie lines, it took the form of things like Cyberverse, where we had a smaller version of the exact same toy line for kids to buy, and that carried over to Transformers Prime, and it worked there as well. Even animated had a small gimmicky line specifically designed for kids. And I don't mind that as much, though it is weird to do it with animated, whose aesthetic is specifically designed to work with kids of that era. It is designed based on what was in style animation-wise at the time. So the toys didn't have any problem appealing to kids. They still did a little kids gimmick line for it. Okay. Fine. I guess as an extension, that's okay. And they did kind of continue with that as well. I think that hit its peak with Age of Extinction, where it felt like the entire toy line was just choked with all of these gimmicky toys, So, you had, one-step changers, you had, flip change, you had, God, how many others can I think of? Yeah, those weird Dino Rider toys, like that didn't even transform. It was literally just so you had Transformers to ride on top of dinosaurs. Okay, cool visual. I don't necessarily think it needed a full toy line, but okay. It gets even worse. I would even continue this into The Last Knight, but The Last Knight's toy line is so kind of weird and deformed. I can't really explain if that is a kids oriented line or a collector's line. It's there's a smattering of collector based toys, but it crashes headfirst into the first year of studio series, and then again, it's just lots of weird gimmicky stuff, to the point where you get to the Bumblebee movie, and it's nothing but gimmicky toys. Bumblebee movie has no deluxes. It has nothing like that, it's literally just gimmick toy, gimmick toy, gimmick toy, gimmick toy. How many yellow Volkswagens can we sell? It got a little extreme. It got a little nuts. Hasbro does at some point recognize that they are creating things that don't feel like Transformers and expecting kids to buy them, which is where we get what I thought was actually a pretty good alternative and a good middle ground, meet me halfway thing, and that was the Warrior class toys. Now, granted, a lot of them aren't great. A lot of Warrior class toys are not great, but every now and then they did come out with one where the gimmickry was kept to a minimum, so the toy got some budget and it got a chance to shine. And sometimes that's all it really needed to do, just this one little opportunity to go, hey, I can make an actual Transformer out of this character, right? So yeah, the Warrior class toys for RID 15 actually had some good things from time to time. I still really like the Megatronus from that line. But that said, I feel like that's come to an end. With the failure of Earthspark rather, I will never not make that mistake. Hasbro, why'd you give them similar names? With the failure of Earthspark and its cancellation, we have seen no effort from Cyberworld to give us Warrior class equivalents. We are missing that $15 or $20 range figure that actually let kids kind of step up a notch and have something more akin to what their big brother or dad would actually have as part of their collection. And even kids are not as dumb. Kids are not as dumb as marketing people in boardrooms would have you believe. They understand that Transformers, the way, were a certain way, and they are meant to be transformed into things. They want to be able to do the transforming. They don't always want to be stuck to these like one-step flip things that work like a butterfly knife or anything like that. They want to transform this stuff. It's why the warrior class size, played out well for like 10 years. It's why they got to step it up a little bit further in Cyberverse by creating the $20 deluxes. Are they as complex or involved as the ones we got? Absolutely not. But they were better engineered, generally more accurate to how they looked in the show, and yeah, better toys overall. So you had this level of progression that is now completely gone. Your options are now a $10 Cyber Changer, which is no challenge to an older kid whatsoever, to the point of like they're probably going to get bored of that fairly soon. But to step it up now, your only option is to go to the deluxe range for the current generations line, which next year is going to run you $28. So you go from a $10 little figure that for kids in the middle are going to just be bored by and feel like it's just too kiddie for them, to having this, figure designed for adults that's also commanding adult prices. And even adults are scoffing at $28 for a deluxe Transformer, and I'm in the same boat. Like, that's a little bit much. I'm going to be extremely selective with things from now on. And we know why that is. We're not going to get into why that is. There's no politics allowed in the comment section. We all hate it. We all know why it's happening. It sucks. Let's just agree that we all hate it and not dredge on it too long. My point here is the middle ground is lost. The entry point is lost. So a kid who is now getting a little bit too old for something like Cyberworld doesn't really have a whole lot of places to go, because the entry point to Transformers is, in the Generations and Collectors era, is just too expensive to go to. Core Class was a great way of bridging the gap. They were, for $10, they're smaller, but you know what? They still could provide a fairly complex and fairly well-articulated figure. It would still be a far better challenge to a kid than what Cyberworld wants $10 for. Sadly, we don't get that anymore. So again, your entry point is gone. And I've spoken out many times at this point that we do need something that's like $15 to $18 range that, a kid could feasibly afford and still felt like a Generations toy. But maybe that's the wrong direction. Maybe it's just we've gone with this route for so long. We've gone with this strategy for so long. Maybe that's the problem. Like 2007, we have been doing this with Transformers, and instead of like bridging this gap, we have let the gap go farther and farther until the bridge is completely collapsed. Those in-between kids are completely abandoned at this point. And you're either young enough to be into these Cyberworld toys or old enough to be into Generations toys, and there's nothing to get you from one point to the next. And this is where we talk about Armada. So with Transformers Armada, there's a few things that went on to create the toy line that we got. And part of that is that Hasbro needed to start over from the ground up because, Beast Machines did not work, Transtech did not work. And they wanted to bring it back to basics a little bit. But on the Takara side of things, they did Car Robots 2000, and the line flopped because it just didn't appeal to kids, and they needed kids on board with the toy line. So while these seem simplistic, and yeah, they are kind of American-driven in their design, Takara is completely on board with this because Armada was a toy line that basically abandoned collectors, which admittedly were kind of in the infancy of being a thing at the time, and instead focused on kid-friendly things that appealed to a younger generation, but still had a budget and felt like really good toys. this worked on both sides of the pond because both Hasbro and Takara desperately needed to get out of this idea that Transformers was a toy line for older kids or adults who just crave nostalgia. This was their way of just going, stop, we're just starting over, and we're doing something that is specifically for kids. And it worked out. It worked out. It got a lot of new kids on board with the franchise. A lot of you watching probably picked up Transformers as a hobby during the Energon trilogy, during the Unicron trilogy. But what got my interest here is the fact that back then there was this effort to step up the toy line with the kids. It wasn't to always present something for little kids. It was to take the audience that you got from the year previous, acknowledge that they are now a year older, want something more involved and interesting, and expand on that. Energon gave you gimmicky Transformers again, but what they were doing is a lot more complex. Having different arms, like torso and leg transformations and combining Autobots together gave the toys a lot more to do. There's more tactile experience to them, more transforming as gimmickry rather than, flip out cannons and whatnot from Armada. And it did give you this really cool toy line that had a lot of interplay. The more you bought, the more it did. But remember, that's just the Autobot side. On the Decepticon side, what you had was a total evolution in what the toys could be. They had built-in gimmicks, but they were all different according to every one of the figures that you bought. And the toys themselves just stood as very good Transformer toys without having the gimmickry involved. Energon Decepticons were generally more articulated than the Autobots, who were, in that regard, hampered by the gimmick. But Decepticons could do whatever they wanted, which ended up making them the cooler toys. Now, while Decepticons never sell as well as Autobots, it does give kids a step up again. They are trying out if kids will respond to these toys that are more complex on the transformation level and maybe not as gimmick loaded as the Autobots were. And again, seems to work out because in Cybertron, the gimmick is almost in the background. They're there, the toys do flip out and do tricks and things, but for the most part, the engineering has stepped up, the articulation has stepped up, the detail work has stepped up. The designs don't really rely nearly as much on just being bright, colorful, kid-friendly. They're what work best for the characters and the designs. So you have this gradual evolution where a kid who got into Armada is now 2 years older, but these toys are still appealing to them because their own tastes have matured. They want something that looks cooler, that looks more involved. So the toy line, for the course of 3 to 4 years, does this fantastic job of constantly escalating what demographic it's aiming for, so that the kids that it picked up with Armada carried over all the way through Cybertron because the line grew up with them instead of constantly targeting the next generation of kids. It gave them a direction to go in. And I would argue that that even continues into classics, where all of the toys, now we're introducing kids to the classic range of Transformer characters, but we're presenting toys that are solely action figures that transform. Articulation's great, detail is great, but they're not relying on any type of gimmickry whatsoever outside of maybe some firing missiles. They're just hard focused on being the best toys they could be at the time. And again, that feels like an evolution. Slowly work the gimmickry out and the complexity up. You could even argue that leads into the live-action movie lines. A kid who started off in Armada becomes this older kid that by the time 2007 rolls around is ready for all of those complex real-world designs that they came up with for the 2007 movie. And I feel like that through line, that gradual rise in the appeal, is where you had this dedicated generation of fans who are now making up a lot of the collectors today. Whereas G1 collectors are kind of aging out of the toy hobby entirely, that Unicron Trilogy generation is here and thriving, and a lot of them are still into it and really kind of a louder voice in the community these days. I would even argue this strategy goes all the way back to Beast Wars, where appealing to kids in 1996 with toys that really did take advantage of the anthropomorphic animal craze in cartoons at the time, but then gradually stepped up their design aesthetic as the years went on to look cooler and cooler. If that wasn't for Transmetals and Fusors in year 2, it certainly was with the more extreme and more like sharp looking designs they did for Transmetal 2. So these strategies used to work. In the 90s they worked, in the 2000s they worked, but Hasbro just kind of abandoned the whole thing for the sake of only focusing on little kids and only focusing on collectors, and you've left such a gap in between. And because of the price hike and the failure of Earthspark at the same time, you are left with no middle ground whatsoever. No entry point for older kids to get into something more complex. There's no through line anymore. There's no gradual rise. You get into Transformers as a little kid and then just kind of drop it because there's nowhere to go. There's no gradual jump. It's a leap. And a lot of kids are not going to bother with that leap. So I feel like it's almost time for that strategy to come back. I feel like the strategy that Hasbro's been doing for over 10 years now is just exhausted. And I've said this before, I would welcome the idea of just like dialing Transformers back to one toy line. I'm so sick of having like 4 or 5 to keep track of. Like, especially now. I don't want to do that anymore. So, those are the thoughts for the day. Just thinking about how it was and would it work now? I kind of think it would. But let me know in the comments let me know in the comments section what you think. And as always, I will see you next time.
Hello everyone, I am Astral Agent Magnetar, a Tokusatsu VTuber, and I am streaming 4 times a week over on Twitch, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoons, and a special late night one on late Friday/early Saturday. So come watch, come hang out, and let's make an impact together.